The sun assaults the land like a smith's hammer, reaching an oppressive 45 degrees Celsius. This scorching heat transforms armor into an inferno and makes the very air feel thick, almost solid, before one can properly inhale. In this fiery cauldron, the Byzantine right flank is on the verge of collapse. 10,000 Persian Immortals, the world's most formidable heavy cavalry, are tearing through the defensive lines as effortlessly as a battering ram shatters decaying wood. These are not mere soldiers, they are living legends. Each warrior rides a Nicean charger, the largest war horses ever bred, and is clad head to toe in scale armor. Trained from early childhood in the deadly art of combat, they are now asserting their dominance. Byzantine cavalry units are scattering before their onslaught.
Halt their advance has been breached, and halt their advance has been breached, and the infantry positioned behind it is faltering. Within moments, perhaps seconds, the entire right flank will crumble. Once it shatters, 50,000 Persians will surge through the opening, turning the current engagement into an outright bloodbath. At the heart of the Byzantine formation, a young commander surveys the escalating chaos. He is just 25 years old. The majority of his forces deem him too inexperienced for such a critical position. Half of them anticipate their demise today, while the other half foresees their end and places the blame squarely on him. His name is Flavius Belisarius, and he is about to make a pivotal decision. He turns to his comrade, John the Armenian, a friend since their youth. John, sensing what is to come, anticipates Belisarius's command before it is even uttered. "Take the Bucellari," Belisarius instructs. "Follow me." 7,000 elite household cavalry, Belisarius's personal guard, men who have trained with him, trust him, and have followed him despite daunting odds, swiftly maneuver into formation. Belisarius neither seeks authorization nor delivers an inspiring address. He simply spurs his horse forward, charging towards the disintegrating flank, towards 10,000 Immortals who have never tasted defeat. The fate of everything hangs precariously on the ensuing moments. Pause and hold that exact instant. To comprehend how a 25-year-old general, commanding an outmatched army, arrived at this impossible juncture, we must rewind 3 days. Back to a time when everyone, without exception, believed Belisarius was on the brink of committing the most significant error of his nascent military career. Back to the genesis of widespread derision. Allow me to illustrate the situation of Flavius Belisarius in the spring of 530 AD. He is young, remarkably so, for the esteemed post he occupies. At 25, he has just been appointed Magister Militum per Orientem, the Byzantine Empire's general of the East. This is one of the empire's most crucial military assignments, and he secured it despite a professional record that could, charitably, be described as inconsistent. You see, Belisarius had previously engaged in warfare. 2 years prior, he and another general named Cetus led a raiding expedition into Persian territory. They suffered a crushing defeat, not merely a loss, but an utter humiliation. It was the kind of setback that incites whispers upon one's entrance into a room, the kind that causes seasoned officers to shake their heads, pondering Emperor Justinian's rationale for promoting such a youth. Consequently, when intelligence arrived that the Persian king of kings, Kavad I, had dispatched an army to seize the fortress city of Dara, everyone fully expected Belisarius to fail once more. The sheer numerical disparity rendered the situation seemingly hopeless. Persian intelligence reports indicated 40,000 troops were on the march, soon to be augmented by an additional 10,000 reinforcements, totaling 50,000 professional veteran warriors, representing the Sasanian Empire's finest fighting force. Belisarius commanded only 25,000, and that figure is a generous assessment, as his 25,000 were hardly the elite of the Byzantine military. Contemporary accounts depict the infantry as unreliable and the cavalry as of dubious quality. His only truly elite units were his personal household guard, the Bucellari, and approximately 600 Hunnic and Heruli mercenaries. Every sane person knew what Belisarius ought to do. It was self-evident, reflecting the common sense of any rational commander. He should remain within Dara's walls, man the ramparts, and prepare for a siege. The fortress, constructed by Emperor Anastasius 3 decades earlier, was specifically designed for such eventualities. Its walls towered over 20 meters high. It boasted 3 hills providing overlapping fields of fire, a protective moat, and extensive supply depots. It was a formidable defensive stronghold. The logical course of action was to hold fast, force the Persians to pay dearly for every inch of ground, and await reinforcements. The strategy for basic siege defense was practically outlined. Therefore, when Belisarius declared his intention to lead his army out of Dara to engage in open battle, the reaction was a blend of shock and disbelief. His officers presumed he had lost his faculties. His soldiers believed their deaths were imminent. And back in Constantinople, upon learning of this audacious plan, Emperor Justinian likely began drafting the letter explaining the necessity of appointing a new general. However, there's an additional factor concerning Dara that amplifies the apparent insanity of this decision. Losing it would be catastrophic. Dara was not merely another fortification, it represented the cornerstone of the entire eastern frontier. It stood a mere 18 kilometers from the Persian border, just 5 kilometers from the frontier line itself. It serves as the main route connecting Mesopotamia with Byzantine territory. This location also acts as the central command for the Eastern Field Army and the administrative hub for the entire region. Should Dara fall, Mesopotamia would be lost, giving the Persians a strategic dagger aimed directly at the core of Byzantine Syria. Every trade route, supply line, and defensive position east of the Euphrates would become vulnerable. Furthermore, there's a significant historical context. For nearly a century, the Byzantines have failed to win a major pitched battle against Persia. While they've had successes in sieges, skirmishes, and tactical maneuvers, in open army versus army confrontations, the Persians have consistently prevailed. They've made Byzantine generals appear incompetent so frequently that it has become almost expected. The psychological burden of this losing streak weighs heavily on every Byzantine soldier. This is precisely why the stakes are incredibly high. It's not just about defending a stronghold, it's about demonstrating that the Byzantine Empire can still stand firm against its ancient adversary. It concerns Justinian's aspirations of rekindling Roman glory, and whether this 25-year-old general will prove to be a brilliant strategist or a catastrophic failure. The Persian army advancing toward Dara embodies all the fears the Byzantines harbor. Leading this formidable force is Perses, also referred to as Pheos in some accounts, a scion of the distinguished Miran family, which has a long history of producing Persian military leaders. Perses holds the title of Marsban, the supreme commander. He is not a political appointee, but a seasoned warrior with decades of combat experience. Beneath him serve 2 wing commanders, Pitaxes and Barismanes. Barismanes is known as the One-Eyed in historical records, indicating his extensive battle experience where he has endured significant injuries and continued to fight. These are not commanders prone to errors. The Persian army itself is a masterwork of military organization. At its heart are the Garden, known as the Immortals. You might recall the original Immortals from Herodotus, the 10,000 elite infantry of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. The Sasanian Persians revived this designation, but with an enhancement. Their Immortals are heavy cavalry, cataphracts mounted on Nicaean horses. These massive war horses, bred in northeastern Iran, are specifically designed to bear the weight of a fully armored warrior and his gear. Each Immortal is essentially a living tank. Scale armor protects both the man and his horse. They wield 12-foot lances, composite bows, swords, and maces. Recruited from the Persian nobility, these men have been trained for warfare since childhood. The unit's name, __quote _3___ stems from the same tradition as its ancient predecessor. When one falls, another instantly fills his place, maintaining a constant strength of precisely 10,000. To their adversaries, they appear indestructible. Beyond the Immortals, there is the regular Savaran cavalry, still heavily armored and lethal, supported by light cavalry horse archers, Arab tribal warriors allied with Persia, and approximately 3,000 saber Huns serving as mercenaries. The infantry, frankly, is not particularly strong. Persian infantry has a poor reputation, described by Byzantine historians as an undisciplined rabble, conscripted levies armed with wicker shields and rudimentary weapons. However, the Persians do not require superior infantry. Their cavalry is so dominant that the infantry's primary role is to fix the enemy in position while the cavalry delivers the decisive blow. 50,000 of these professional, experienced, and confident warriors are now marching on Dara. If you give this video a like, we will witness this army's destruction by a 25-year-old and a bath slave. Yes, you heard correctly, a bath slave. Remain attentive. The Persian army arrives and establishes its camp about 5 kilometers south of Dara, in a location called Immortal, close enough to pose a threat, yet distant enough to offer safety. Belisarius then undertakes a perplexing action that defies all observation. He orders his men to begin digging. Not to construct fortifications around the city, nor to erect additional walls, nor to prepare for a siege, but to dig ditches in the open field between Dara and the Persian camp. His officers stare in disbelief. His soldiers exchange bewildered glances. The civilians on Dara's walls watch with mounting confusion. "Sir," someone likely asks, "we possess fortress walls and a moat. Why are we excavating ditches before the city?" Belisarius offers no explanation. He merely displays the design. And the design is peculiar. It is neither a straight line nor a simple defensive trench. Instead, it forms a crescent shape, arcing like a bow with the Byzantine position at its center. In fact, crescent fails to capture the strangeness of this layout. The central segment of the trench is pulled back, recessed toward Dara. The two flanking sections extend forward, reaching toward the Persian lines. Then, two perpendicular trenches connect the entire system. It resembles either a crooked smile or a bear trap, depending on one's perspective. The ditches are quite broad, too broad for a cavalry horse to clear, and deep enough to diminish a charge's force. However, here's the crucial detail. They aren't continuous. There are intervals, bridges, and points for crossing at strategic spots. To the Persians observing from 5 kilometers away, this tactic seems irrational. You don't halt cavalry with ditches. You do so with pike formations, fortifications, or dense infantry ranks. Ditches are typically for sieges, and this isn't one. This is poised to be a direct battle. Yet, Belisarius continues the digging. Once the ditches are complete, he positions his troops. His infantry, unreliable and questionable as they are stationed behind the central, recessed section of the trench. They are sufficiently close to Dara's walls for archers on the battlements to offer covering fire, protected both by the trench in front and the stronghold behind. The message is unambiguous. These soldiers aren't expected to be heroes, they simply need to hold their ground. On the flanks, behind the forward trenches, Belisarius deploys his cavalry. They too benefit from the ditch's protection. These excavations will disrupt any Persian cavalry assault attempting to reach them. But this is where the strategy becomes particularly intriguing. Within the crescent formation, concealed behind his frontline cavalry, Belisarius positions 600 Hunnic horsemen, 300 on each side, under the command of Sunicus, Igan, Seamus, and Ascan. These Huns, like typical cavalry, are swift, agile horse archers, completely hidden from the Persians' view. Furthermore, on the far left flank, behind a low hill, Belisarius places a unit of Heruli cavalry led by a warrior named Pharas. The Heruli are German mercenaries, known for their fierce prowess. They are not merely hidden, they are in an ambush stance, their presence entirely unknown to the Persians. At the very rear center, behind all other forces, Belisarius keeps his bucellari, his elite personal guard, 7,000 of the finest heavy cavalry in the Byzantine army, serving as his reserve, his decisive strike force for the critical moment. The Persians witness much of this, though they miss the concealed Huns and the ambushed Heruli. What they do perceive is a Byzantine army spread out before its fortress, protected by some ditches, with fewer numbers and inferior quality troops. They've done the calculations: 50,000 versus 25,000, professional warriors against questionable soldiers. This, they believe, should be an easy victory. And then, day one commences, becoming even more bizarre. The two armies confront each other across a few hundred meters of the sweltering Mesopotamian desert. It's already blisteringly hot. Armor retains heat, men are drenched in sweat through their padding, horses stamp and snort. And yet, no one attacks. This is where ancient and medieval warfare reveals its fascinating nuances, a divergence from cinematic portrayals. Armies do not simply collide instantly. There's posturing, careful positioning, and a patient wait for the opportune moment, sometimes for hours. However, the Persians have a custom. Before significant battles, they issue challenges: single combat, champion against champion. It's a form of psychological warfare, entertainment, and a trial of bravery. A Persian warrior, mounted, armored, and carrying a lance, rides forth from the Persian lines. He canters to a spot between the two armies and issues a challenge. He wishes to fight Belisarius one-on-one, the general of the Byzantine army against a Persian champion. All eyes turn to Belisarius. This is clearly a trap. If Belisarius accepts and is defeated, Byzantine morale will shatter. If he declines, he appears weak. Either way, the Persians win the psychological contest. Belisarius, however, does something unforeseen. He refuses, but not discreetly. He doesn't retreat, he simply offers no response. An unexpected figure responds. A man emerges from the Byzantine lines on foot. Not mounted, not in full armor, just a man walking into no man's land. His name is Andreas. Here's what the Persian warrior perceives: a nobody, a servant, perhaps a camp follower, someone's aide. The Persians likely laugh. The Byzantine army probably gasps, wondering. Quote 7. Quote, here's what the historical sources disclose about Andreas. He is Belisarius's bath slave. In the ancient world, this title didn't carry the modern connotation. Andreas wasn't scrubbing floors. He was more of a personal attendant, managing Belisarius's physical training regimen. Apparently, Andreas owned a wrestling school and gymnasium back in Constantinople. He was an athlete, a wrestler, and a trainer. And here's the detail known only to Belisarius. Andreas had been secretly training with the bucellari. Belisarius had allowed this wrestler to drill with his elite household cavalry, mastering spearwork, swordwork, and combat horsemanship. But from an external perspective, Andreas appears to be a civilian on the verge of certain death. The Persian warrior, mounted on his warhorse, lowers his lance. He intends to ride this fool down and impale him like meat on a skewer. This, he expects, will conclude in mere seconds. Andreas waits. Clutching only a spear, with no shield for protection, Andreas braced himself. The Persian warrior charged, galloping forward. Hooves thundered across the ground as the lance descended. At the very last moment, Andreas dodged, employing a maneuver reminiscent of a wrestler's fluid motion, conserving energy and making every movement count. The lance narrowly missed its target. In a swift countermove, Andreas plunged his spear into the Persian's right breast, piercing the armor and puncturing a lung. The Persian soldier tumbled from his mount, hitting the earth with a violent impact. He attempted to rise but was unable, hindered by his heavy armor and the internal bleeding from his punctured lung. Andreas acted without hesitation. He discarded the spear, pulled out a small knife, and knelt on the Persian's chest. As recounted by Procopius, our primary historical account, Andreas ended the Persian's life ritualistically, like a sacrifice, severing his throat as he lay supine, spilling blood onto the sand. A boisterous cheer erupted from the Byzantine troops, both from atop Dara's walls and from their ranks. The once insignificant bath slave, this wrestler, had vanquished a celebrated Persian warrior in single combat. The Persian army fell silent. Then, in a critical error of judgment, one of their officers dispatched a second combatant, an older, more seasoned fighter armed with both a whip and a spear. This confrontation had escalated beyond a mere skirmish. It was now a matter of honor and retribution. Andreas did not return to the Byzantine lines. Instead, he reclaimed his spear and mounted the fallen Persian's horse. Now, both combatants were mounted. The second Persian warrior advanced. They confronted each other, each on horseback, each bearing a spear. They charged. The thoughts that raced through the second Persian's mind in those final moments remain unknown. Perhaps he felt assured, or enraged, or terrified. All that is certain is that Andreas struck him down as well, with a spear thrust to the chest, felling a second warrior. A second body now lay on the sand. Andreas rode back to the Byzantine lines on the captured Persian horse, its hide smeared with another man's blood. The Byzantine army was ecstatic, their joy palpable. The Persians, however, stood in stunned disbelief, struggling to comprehend the astonishing events. A bath slave had defeated two of their champions, one after another. Morale is a potent force. The Byzantines entered the evening feeling invincible, while the Persians were left with profound doubts. Yet Belisarius had not exhausted his psychological tactics. That evening, he sent a letter to Perozes, the Persian commander. It was not a message of mockery or boastfulness, but an appeal for peace. The letter, to paraphrase the translation, declared, "Peace is the greatest blessing, agreed upon by all rational men. Therefore, the most effective general is one who can transform war into peace." Its language was elaborate and thoughtful. To Perozes, sitting in his tent with an army of 50,000, it sounded like an admission of fear. He likely smiled as he read it. This young general, with his smaller army concealed behind fortifications and using bath slaves in combat, now sought peace. Naturally, he desired peace, sensing impending defeat. Perozes shared the letter with his commanders, who concurred. This indicated desperation. They resolved to attack the following day, intending to crush the Byzantines and enter Dara triumphant. Perozes sent his refusal. That night, 10,000 reinforcements arrived from Nisibis, a Persian fortress city. The Persian army swelled to 50,000. Their confidence was so high that they were likely already mentally dividing the spoils of war. Historians still debate a crucial question. Was Belisarius genuinely fearful? Or was the letter a calculated act of psychological warfare designed to instill overconfidence in the Persians? Here is my perspective. Belisarius was 25 years old, outnumbered 2-1, with an army of questionable quality, facing the premier military force in the Near East. Was he afraid? Without a doubt, any sane individual would be. But was he trying to avoid battle? No, and this is what many overlooked. You don't construct intricate trench systems if you intend to negotiate. You don't set up ambushes if you're hoping for peace talks. You don't train your bath slave for combat if you believe you can talk your way out of the situation. That letter was a lure. Psychological warfare crafted to make the enemy arrogant, aggressive, and to provoke them into attacking a prepared position rather than seeking vulnerabilities. And it succeeded perfectly. The Persians retired that night, convinced of their victory. 50,000 against 25,000. Professional warriors against unreliable troops. The Immortals against bath slaves. Tomorrow would be a massacre. They were correct about the massacre, but tragically mistaken about who would be slaughtered. Dawn broke over Mesopotamia. The temperature was already 35 degrees Celsius. By midday, it would reach 45 degrees Celsius, a heat that made chainmail almost unbearable to touch.
transforming a day of fighting into an ordeal of endurance. The Persian army assembled in their camp. The sight of 50,000 men preparing for battle was a spectacle in itself. The clinking of armor, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, the pervasive smell of horses, leather, and sweat. Morning slowly gave way to midday. Letters were exchanged, a formal, feudal display of diplomacy. The Byzantines requested peace talks. The Persians declined. Every participant understands this charade merely postpones the inevitable. Eventually, around midday, both armies take their positions. The Persians establish two formidable lines at the core, positioning light infantry, slingers, archers, and javelin throwers at the forefront, supported by conscripted infantry further back. These foot soldiers serve primarily as buffers, designed to absorb enemy projectiles and fix the Byzantine infantry in place. However, the true offensive power resides on the wings, where Persian heavy cavalry, including the elite Savarans and Immortals, are stationed. The left flank is commanded by Belisarius, the one-eyed, while Pitaxes leads the right. Both wings are further bolstered by horse archers and Arabian light cavalry. The Byzantines arranged themselves precisely as they had the previous day, with one crucial alteration unnoticed by the Persians. Faris and his Heruli cavalry are concealed behind a hill on the Byzantine left. They represent an unexpected maneuver, a hidden advantage, and their presence is unknown to any in the Persian forces. Initially, both sides exchange volleys of arrows, resulting in scattered fatalities. These are minor engagements, mere test shots, with neither side committing fully. Then, the Persians perceive a significant factor: the wind. A potent gust is blowing from the Byzantine positions directly towards the Persians. While seemingly trivial, for archers, wind direction is paramount. Byzantine arrows gain propulsion and range, whereas Persian arrows are impeded, diminishing their efficacy. This presents a minor edge, yet in such confrontations, small advantages accumulate. Perses issues the command, and the Persian cavalry prepares to assault. The paramount question is where their initial strike will land. The answer: both flanks simultaneously. However, our focus will be on the Byzantine left first, as this is where the conflict's outcome is determined. Pitaxes guides the Persian right wing forward. A massed formation comprising 5,000 to 7,000 cavalry, including Savaran cavalry, some Immortals, and Arab horsemen, advances directly towards the Byzantine left flank, led by Bozes. The ground trembles. Even a small number of charging heavy cavalry can sound like thunder. Envision thousands. The Byzantine cavalry behind the forward trench observes their approach. Some offer prayers, others repeatedly check their weaponry, while a few simply watch and wait. The Persians reach the trench, revealing the ingenious strategy devised by Belisarius. The trench is too wide to leap over, compelling the Persians to decelerate, locate bridges, and traverse them in a constricted manner. Their formation condenses, transforming from a broad wave into segmented streams navigating bottlenecks. Nevertheless, sufficient bridges allow their passage. Persian cavalry pours across, engaging the Byzantine cavalry in close combat. Swords and lances clash, horses cry out, and men perish. The Byzantine left wing begins to yield ground. Bozes endeavors to maintain his men's discipline, but they are steadily pushed back in a fighting retreat. The Persians press on, having crossed the trench and gaining territory. This is the opportunity the Persian commanders have anticipated: the breakthrough. With sustained pressure, the Byzantine flank will collapse, allowing them to wheel inwards, sweep through the entire Byzantine line, and conclude the battle. It is at this juncture that 300 Hunnic horsemen emerge abruptly. Sunikas and Igan lead them. These are the Huns Belisarius had concealed within his crescent formation. The Persians had mistakenly assumed the Byzantine cavalry on the flanks constituted the entirety of their outer defenses, unaware of these light cavalry horse archers held in reserve. The Huns strike the Persians from the side, not head-on, targeting their flank while the Persians are primarily engaged in pushing back the Byzantine cavalry. Suddenly, Persian warriors face incoming arrows from an unexpected direction, and enemy cavalry materialize where they should not be. Disarray spreads through the Persian right wing. The situation escalates. From behind the Persians, originating from the low hill they had barely noticed, Faris leads the Heruli cavalry into their rear. The Persian right wing is now ensnared between three forces: Byzantine cavalry in front, now re-energized by the arrival of aid, Hunnic horse archers on their flank, and Heruli warriors at their rear. This is the embodiment of panic within a military formation. Individual bravery becomes irrelevant when the direction of engagement is unclear. Should they fight forward? Should they pivot to counter the flank attack? Or should they turn to address the threat from behind? The Persian right wing attempts all three simultaneously, achieving none effectively. Then Sunicus, the Hunnic commander, executes an action that completely shatters their resolve. He personally rides down and kills Belisarius, the one-eyed Persian commander, the seasoned leader who held this wing together, and then dispatches his standard-bearer for good measure. When the standard falls and the commander perishes, the battle is effectively over. Ancient armies do not fight to the last man. They fight until command and control disintegrate, and this is that definitive moment. The Persian right wing is routed, with 3,000 to 5,000 casualties reported, depending on the source. The remaining forces were in full retreat, rushing back towards their encampment. The Byzantine left flank had secured a victory. However, the battle was far from over, as the Byzantines found themselves on the verge of defeat on the opposing wing. Peros, observing from the central position, witnessed the collapse of his right flank and made the crucial, desperate decision to commit all his remaining forces to the other side. He hoped that a breakthrough there might still salvage the situation. He dispatched the Immortals, a formidable force of 10,000 elite warriors, renowned for their legendary status, mounted on Nean steeds and armored like formidable strongholds. Each soldier carried a formidable 12-foot kontos lance. They formed their ranks, lowered their lances, and launched a direct assault on the Byzantine right. The Byzantine cavalry on that flank were confronted with a daunting sight: a moving wall of armored death accelerating toward them. These seemingly invincible men and horses were a truly terrifying spectacle. The Immortals had remained undefeated throughout living memory, having shattered every enemy formation they had ever encountered. And now they advanced menacingly. The Byzantine cavalry braced themselves, relying on the trends to impede their progress and disrupt their momentum. But they were mistaken. The Immortals struck the trench line with minimal reduction in speed. While some faltered at the crossing points, the majority surged through, plunging into the midst of the Byzantine cavalry with their long lances. Chaos ensued, with men falling and horses screaming in agony as the Byzantine right flank buckled under immense pressure, threatening to collapse entirely. If it broke, the battle would undeniably be lost, allowing 50,000 Persians to pour through, leading to the fall of Dara and the loss of Mesopotamia. This was the critical juncture mentioned earlier, where Belisarius, positioned at the center of his formations, made his decisive move. Without a moment's hesitation, he addressed John the Armenian. "Take the Bellari, follow me." 7,000 elite cavalrymen swiftly maneuvered into formation. These were Belisarius's personal troops, men who had trained alongside him, trusted him implicitly, and understood that when he called upon them, everything hung in the balance. Belisarius himself led them forward, not directly confronting the Immortals, which would have been suicidal, as even elite cavalry couldn't match them in a head-on charge. Instead, Belisarius leveraged his sole advantage: internal lines. Positioned at the core of his formation, while the Immortals were extended and fully committed to their attack on his right, he could reach his right flank more swiftly than the Persians could reinforce theirs. The Bellari struck the Immortals from the flank, not the front, but the side. In cavalry engagements, angles are paramount. Engaging an adversary directly ahead allows the use of lances, swords, or the horse's momentum. However, being struck from a 90-degree angle necessitates turning,
reorienting and breaking formation to counter the new threat. The Immortals attempted to adapt. Half of them wheeled to face this fresh enemy, while the other half pressed onward, pursuing the still retreating Byzantine cavalry. It was at this precise moment that the trap fully sprung. The Byzantine cavalry, previously in retreat, abruptly halted, regrouped, and turned around. With the newly arrived Belisarius at their backs, they charged back into the Immortals who had been pursuing them. The Immortals were now caught overextended, fatigued, overheated in the 45-degree heat, and clad in full armor after a cavalry charge and intense combat. Simultaneously from the right flank, the Hunnic cavalry, having concluded their engagement with the shattered Persian right wing, rode over to join the fray, unleashing more arrows, harassment, and pressure. The half of the Immortals that had turned to confront the Belisarius found themselves in brutal close-quarters combat with some of the Byzantine's finest heavy cavalry, a potentially even match in skill. But the Immortals were now fighting on two fronts. 5,000 Immortals were ensnared between the Belisarius and the Byzantine cavalry, while another 5,000 were locked in combat with fresh troops. Neither group could assist the other. The trapped 5,000 perished, not all, as some broke and fled, but thousands remained to fight and die in that pocket, with no escape. These were Immortals, and Immortals do not surrender. The remaining 5,000, witnessing the destruction of half their unit, broke ranks. These were Persia's finest warriors, yet even they recognized a hopeless situation. The Immortals routed. When the Immortals ran, everyone else followed suit. The Persian infantry in the center observed both wings collapsing and saw the Immortals fleeing, leading them to question, quote, 11, quote. The rout became widespread. 50,000 men desperately attempted to disengage and escape, discarding weapons, abandoning equipment, and racing towards the camp at Immortal, 5 kilometers away. Belisarius ordered a pursuit. His cavalry chased them for several miles, cutting down stragglers, eliminating the slow and the routed. Then, Belisarius commanded them to halt. His officers were bewildered. They believed they could pursue these fleeing Persians all the way back to Nissus, turning this into a complete annihilation. But Belisarius firmly stated, quote, _12. Why? Because he was strategizing 3 moves ahead. A retreating army is perilous if it suddenly ceases its retreat and establishes a defensive posture. Should Persian backup be nearby, this pursuit might transform into a trap. Even after a significant victory, Belisarius was unwilling to jeopardize his forces by chasing further glory. It is characteristic of a skilled commander to discern when to advance and when to disengage. The Byzantine army retracted to its fortifications and commenced a count. Between 8,000 and 10,000 Persian deceased were reported, depending on the source consulted, and both wing commanders were either dead or had fled. The equipment of the elite Immortals lay abandoned everywhere, shattered. The Persian encampment at Immortal was deserted amidst the panic. Byzantine fatalities were, according to sources, minimal. The majority of the infantry did not engage in combat. They remained behind their trench, observing the cavalry determine the outcome. Cavalry losses on the flanks were moderate, but paled in comparison to the Persians. An army of 25,000 had vanquished one of 50,000. A smaller contingent had overwhelmed a larger one. A 25-year-old general, commanding dubious troops, had decimated the premier military power in the Near East, achieving this feat with the aid of trenches. For more battles showcasing intellect overcoming brute force, subscribe to History Explained, as this exemplifies a situation where strategy superseded numerical superiority. Let us dissect the actual events, for this is not merely an intriguing tale, but a masterclass in military strategy. Military analysts often utilize what are termed the principles of war. While specific lists vary by nation, 4 core principles are universally recognized: security, mobility, surprise, and control. Belisarius excelled in all 4. Firstly, security. The most significant vulnerability within Belisarius's army was its infantry. They were perceived as unreliable and of low quality. If the Persians could force them into close-quarters combat, they would likely break. Thus, Belisarius ensured they would not have to fight. He positioned them behind the central trench in a defensive stance, sufficiently close to Dara's walls to receive supporting fire from the city's archers. The instruction to his infantry was clear. Quote 13, and they did. Most never brandished a weapon, yet they held the center, which was precisely what Belisarius required. The cavalry also received protection. The trenches did not entirely impede the Persians, nor were they meant to. Instead, they disrupted the Persian charge, funneling the adversary into designated kill zones and affording the Byzantine cavalry time to react, rather than being instantly overrun. Mobility. This is where the elite mounted troops truly excelled. Belisarius kept 7,000 elite cavalry in reserve at the center. Why? Because the center offers the quickest route to reinforce either flank. This is known as interior lines in military doctrine. The Persians faced a longer distance to move reinforcements to either wing, whereas Belisarius had a shorter one. He could shift his forces more rapidly than his foe. When the right flank began to falter, Belisarius did not have to traverse the entire battle line from the left. He simply deployed his reserve, already ideally positioned. 5 minutes, perhaps less, to engage. The Persians would have required 15 or 20 minutes to reassign troops from one wing to another. Surprise! This is where Belisarius elevated warfare to an art form. The initial surprise involved the 600 Hunnic cavalry concealed within the formation. The Persians assumed the Byzantine cavalry on the flanks represented their entire mounted force, failing to account for reserves hidden behind them. When these Huns abruptly emerged mid-battle, firing arrows into their flank, Persian commanders suddenly realized their miscalculation. The second surprise was the Heruli ambush. Pharas and his cavalry were hidden behind a low hill. The Persians were aware of the hill, they had likely scouted it. However, they probably did not anticipate a significant force being stationed there, as it was outside the primary battle line. Then, unexpectedly, Germanic warriors appeared in their rear. Quote 1-4, they must have wondered. The third surprise was the entire trench system. Belisarius had adopted this tactic from the Persians themselves during the Battle of Dara 2 years prior. He adapted it, refined it, and made it his own. The Persians invented this blueprint, and Belisarius used it to defeat them. Control. This is the paramount aspect, distinguishing Belisarius from every other Byzantine general who had confronted the Persians in the preceding century. Belisarius selected the battlefield. He dictated when to fight and where to fight. He positioned the ditches precisely where he desired them. He deployed his troops exactly where they needed to be. He compelled the Persians to attack his prepared positions rather than allowing them to exploit their own advantages. And throughout the battle, he maintained command. When the left flank was imperiled, the Huns and Heruli struck at the opportune moment. When the right flank was collapsing, Belisarius committed his reserve at the precise moment, not too soon, which would have squandered them, but not too late, which would have led to disaster. At the perfect instant. That is true command and control. This reveals a commander capable of grasping the full scope of a battle in real time, making instant decisions that can turn imminent defeat into triumph. However, there's a deeper element at play here, something historians occasionally overlook: psychological warfare. Consider Andreas dispatching those 2 Persian champions. This act holds no tactical weight. 2 fallen Persians out of 50,000 do not alter the strategic calculation. Yet, its psychological impact is profound. It communicates to the Byzantine forces, these Persians are not unconquerable. A simple bath slave just felled 2 of their elite warriors. You too can overcome them. Conversely, it instills a sense of unease in the Persians. Something is amiss here. These Byzantines are fearless. That non-entity eliminated our champions. Perhaps this army is more formidable than we assumed. Similarly, Belisarius's peace proposal was a psychological maneuver designed to project an image of weakness, inflate the Persians' overconfidence, and provoke aggression. When you lure an enemy into an aggressive stance against a fortified position, you leverage your own inherent strengths. Even the trench system was a form of psychological combat. It conveyed defensiveness, suggesting Belisarius was intimidated. But this was a deception. It was a snare. The trenches didn't block the Persians. Instead, they channeled, guided, and funneled them into the precise locations Belisarius intended for them. This strategic depth is why Belisarius is remembered as one of history's greatest generals. His brilliance wasn't confined to tactics. He grasped that warfare is as much about the enemy's mental state as it is about physical combat. The Persians perceived a youthful, inexperienced general with inferior troops concealed behind ditches, interpreting it as vulnerability. Belisarius recognized their perception of weakness and expertly exploited it. That is the mark of genius. News of this triumph swept through the Byzantine Empire with astonishing speed. For the first time in nearly a century, the Byzantines had vanquished the Persians in open-field combat. This was no mere skirmish or siege. It was a full-scale pitched battle, army against army, defying numerical superiority, confronting the legendary Immortals, everything that made the Persian military fearsome. And a 25-year-old orchestrated it. Emperor Justinian, only 3 years into his reign, celebrated this victory. He harbored ambitions of restoring the Roman Empire to its former glory, reclaiming the lost western provinces, and establishing Constantinople as the focal point of a unified Mediterranean. Now, he possessed a general capable of achieving such victories. Belisarius became an instant hero. The young general who safeguarded Dara, the strategist who defeated the Persians, the man who broke the Immortals. His career skyrocketed. Within 3 years, Justinian would dispatch him to Africa to conquer the Vandal kingdom, a mission in which he would succeed spectacularly. Carthage fell, and the entire North African coast reverted to Roman authority. Next came Italy. Belisarius invaded the Ostrogothic kingdom, securing Sicily, then Naples, and entered Rome as a liberator in December 536. When the Goths besieged Rome with overwhelming forces, Belisarius heroically defended the city for over a year, once again proving victorious despite being vastly outnumbered. Over the next 3 decades, Belisarius would campaign across the Mediterranean, expanding Justinian's empire by 45%. He would come to be known as, quote, 17, quote, and it all began at Dara. However, military glory is often transient and can be hollow. Just 1 year after Dara, in 531, Belisarius suffered a severe setback. The Persians, their pride wounded, were unwilling to concede defeat. King Kavad dispatched another army, this time with Lakhmid Arab allies, who took an unexpected route through Kajini, aiming for Antioch, a paramount city of the Byzantine East. Belisarius intercepted them at a location called Callinicum, near the Euphrates River. This battle dramatically illustrated that a single brilliant victory does not confer invincibility. Belisarius attempted to establish another defensive position, anchoring his infantry on the riverbank and positioning cavalry on the flanks. It was a sound strategy, but his officers proved insubordinate. Emboldened and overconfident after Dara, they believed themselves invincible and disregarded orders. They attacked prematurely when instructed to hold, and broke formation when they should have maintained it. The Battle of Callinicum devolved into a catastrophe. While the Byzantines technically held the field, they sustained heavy casualties. The Persians also suffered losses, but that fact was secondary. Belisarius was compelled to retreat, and his reputation was tarnished. Ultimately, the Byzantines ended up paying tribute to Persia. The, quote, 1-8 Treaty of 532 was less a genuine peace and more a payment to prevent further incursions. This truce would endure for 8 years before Khosrow I, Kavad's son, abrogated it and launched another invasion. Dara, meanwhile, became a recurring symbol, a fortress that repeatedly changed hands.
The Battle of Dara, even 1,400 years later, offers a crucial lesson. Numbers are not the ultimate factor. 50,000 soldiers could not overcome 25,000 because the smaller force benefited from superior leadership, strategic positioning, and smarter fighting. On paper, the arithmetic was straightforward. The Persians possessed twice the manpower, the fearsome immortals, seasoned commanders, and momentum from decades of victories. Yet, none of these advantages mattered once the fighting commenced, because warfare is fundamentally more complex than mere mathematics. Warfare is akin to a strategic game played with human lives, and Belisarius consistently remained several steps ahead. This recurring theme echoes through history, spanning diverse cultures and eras, much like a fundamental principle of combat. Consider the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where English longbowmen decimated French cavalry, an estimated 6,000 English soldiers against 25,000 French, with the English triumphing due to superior placement and weaponry. At Cannae in 216 BC, Hannibal executed a double envelopment of a larger Roman army, transforming Rome's numerical superiority into a deadly trap where 80,000 Romans perished. Similarly, at Gaugamela in 331 BC, Alexander's Macedonian forces shattered Darius's Persian legions, with 47,000 Macedonians confronting 100,000 or more Persians. Alexander's tactical brilliance rendered the numerical disparity irrelevant. The recurring insight is clear. Quality surpasses quantity, tactics outperform brute strength, and intellect trumps brute force. This narrative, retold in various forms across centuries, consistently delivers the same message. The larger army doesn't always prevail. Victory often belongs to the more astute army, the better prepared one, or the army led by a superior general. However, there's a deeper truth embedded here, extending beyond mere tactical superiority over numbers. The allure of the underdog narrative. The human psyche, across all cultures, is inherently drawn to underdog stories. We instinctively champion David against Goliath, celebrating unexpected triumphs. We cherish tales of the weak overcoming the strong, because they instill a belief that our own disadvantages are surmountable. They suggest that being smaller, weaker, poorer, or less equipped doesn't necessarily predestine us to failure. And indeed, sometimes this holds true. Sometimes the underdog emerges victorious. Sometimes cunning defeats might. Sometimes unwavering determination conquers resource limitations. Dara stands as a testament to this, where 25,000 triumphed over 50,000. An ostensibly inferior force crushed a superior one, rendering the impossible real. Yet, and this is critically important, what distinguished Belisarius as a triumphant underdog rather than one who perished? What separated his narrative from the countless underdogs who lost and faded into obscurity? The answer lies in preparation, meticulous, exhaustive, and often unglamorous preparation. This involved days of arduous labor under a blazing sun, a process demanding the anticipation of every conceivable scenario. It appeared as paranoia to onlookers until it ultimately saved lives. Those defensive features didn't materialize on their own. The elaborate trench system required days of grueling work under the scorching Mesopotamian sun. Imagine thousands of soldiers toiling with shovels and pickaxes in temperatures reaching 45 degrees Celsius, excavating soil, shaping trenches, and constructing a defensive network that seemed outlandish to all who observed it. Hours upon hours of effort that appeared nonsensical until the battle commenced. Soldiers voiced grievances about digging holes instead of preparing for a siege. Officers questioned the strategy, and everyone was sweltering, exhausted, and confused. The battle mentally before it transpired. The battle mentally before it transpired, then meticulously creating the physical circumstances to bring his vision to fruition. Positioning 600 Hunnic cavalry precisely to strike the Persian flank demanded extensive reconnaissance.
Multiple scouts meticulously surveyed sightlines, gaining an intimate understanding of the battlefield's topography down to the meter. This involved anticipating the Persians' attack points even before they themselves knew, calculating angles, distances, and timing, and possessing enough confidence in his analysis to conceal valuable troops in a position where their involvement might not even be required. This wasn't a stroke of inspiration. It was rigorous calculation, mathematics applied to the art of warfare. It involved countless hours of planning meetings, where Belisarius thoroughly reviewed contingencies with his commanders. The Heruli ambush, nestled behind that hill, was another testament to this. Belisarius either personally reconnoitered the terrain or entrusted someone reliable to do so. He absolutely had to ascertain that the hill could conceal cavalry undetected by the enemy from a distance of 5 kilometers. He had to strategically place Ferrus and his warriors before the battle began, knowing they would remain there for hours in the sweltering heat, observing and awaiting a signal that might never arrive. He had to trust Ferrus to discern the precise moment when his attack would pivot disaster into victory, not too soon, not too late, but impeccably timed. This wasn't improvisation. It was preparation meeting opportunity. It was a practiced maneuver, a rehearsal. It's highly probable that Belisarius walked Ferrus through the plan multiple times. Quote 19. Then there was the Belisarius Reserve. Belisarius personally trained these men, 7,000 elite cavalry who trusted him implicitly, following his orders without question, even when those orders seemed irrational. He cultivated this loyalty over months and years, proving himself to them through training, smaller skirmishes, and 100 instances where he demonstrated that allegiance to him meant survival. He had to earn their utmost respect. He had to cultivate a willingness in them to follow him even into dire circumstances, trusting that he would guide them back safely. This wasn't merely charisma, though that certainly aided. It was a deeply earned trust, a display of proven capability. It comprised countless small acts of leadership that convinced his soldiers there was a valid reason behind his audacious orders. Consider Andreas, the Bath slave who achieved legendary status by slaying 2 Persian champions. Belisarius recognized something exceptional in this wrestler, a unique blend of bravery, skill, and controlled aggression, and equipped him with the training he needed to become formidable. He allowed Andreas to train with the Busalari, teaching him to combat mounted adversaries, interpret an opponent's movements, and exploit weaknesses in their armor, preparing him for a pivotal moment Belisarius couldn't have foretold but knew was possible. This wasn't luck. It was the discernment of potential and its careful cultivation. It involved recognizing worth in unexpected places and understanding that valiant fighters emerge from all walks of life. Sometimes, the victor isn't the one who outwardly appears to be a warrior. Underdogs don't triumph by chance. Their victories aren't products of cosmic rewards for righteousness or favorable twists of fate. They don't succeed through hope, prayer, or fervent wishes. Instead, they win by dedicating themselves more intensely than expected, preparing while others rest, and strategizing when others are complacent. They seize opportunities overlooked by others who are distracted by obvious drawbacks. The Persians assumed the Byzantines would fail due to their numerical and qualitative inferiority. They observed the facts and drew rational conclusions. 25,000 versus 50,000 meant a Persian victory. Questionable Byzantine cavalry against elite Immortals also pointed to Persian triumph. An inexperienced young general facing seasoned commanders suggested another Persian win. They were partially correct. The Byzantines indeed had fewer and less capable troops. These weren't erroneous assumptions, but accurate appraisals of an observable reality. The Persian scouts weren't fabricating information, nor were their commanders incompetent. They assessed the situation and reached logical conclusions based on their experience and evidence. But their evaluations were incomplete. They failed to account for the most crucial variable, generalship. They didn't consider Belisarius's ability to identify their strengths and devise ways to neutralize them, or how he could transform disadvantages into tactical ploys through preparation. The Byzantines possessed a superior general, which in warfare is often decisive. Not always, as Belisarius would indeed suffer a defeat at Callinicum a year later, demonstrating that even brilliance has limits, but often enough to risk everything on. Frequently enough that meticulous preparation and astute intelligence can outweigh numerical superiority and equipment. Furthermore, the dynamic between youth and experience warrants examination, specifically the merits and limitations of both. Perses hailed from the veteran Myran family of commanders, a lineage that had produced Persian military leaders for generations. He wasn't a political appointee who bought his rank or inherited it solely through family ties. He was a professional soldier who likely began fighting wars before Belisarius was born. He understood tactics, strategy, and the mechanics of battle. He had observed patterns, made and learned from early career mistakes, and survived decades in one of the world's most perilous professions. Belisarius, having lost an eye in combat, evidenced his extensive fighting experience. Consider that, he lost an eye in battle, likely from a sword, spear, or arrow that narrowly missed killing him. Yet, he recuperated, returned to war, and ascended to command a wing of the Persian army. This isn't a sign of inexperience. It's a testament to skill-driven survival. It reflects continuous learning, adaptation, and improvement. For the alternative was death. One doesn't reach senior command as a one-eyed warrior unless exceptionally proficient. Pitaxes led the Immortals, the most elite unit in the Persian military. This assignment isn't granted as a favor or through political connections. It's earned by demonstrating the capacity to lead the empire's finest warriors. It requires tactical genius, personal bravery, and a command presence that inspires elite soldiers to sacrifice their lives. These were seasoned professionals. They deeply understood warfare, had won battles before, and had frequently defeated Byzantine armies. Their confidence was justifiable, resting on a foundation of proven success. They weren't arrogant fools. They were veterans who had earned their reputations. Belisarius, in contrast, was 25. That age disparity was significant. It wasn't a minor difference in viewpoint. It was the chasm between a veteran who had experienced everything and a young officer whose record largely consisted of setbacks. On paper, experience should have prevailed. A more experienced, sagacious, and battle-hardened leader should invariably outmaneuver and outwit a novice. Such an individual ought to anticipate their opponent's every move, exploit their lack of experience, and leverage decades of accumulated insight to quell youthful aspirations. Indeed, age and experience hold significant weight. There's a valid reason military organizations consider seniority for promotions. Certain wisdom is only gained through years of practical application, and pattern recognition develops solely after observing similar scenarios countless times. The ability to remain calm under duress stems from having previously endured such pressures, and understanding what succeeds versus what fails comes from concrete trial and error, not mere theoretical knowledge. However, these attributes do not guarantee triumph. They do not render one invincible, nor do they preclude defeat. Occasionally, though rarely, an uncluttered young mind, unburdened by archaic traditions, can discern solutions that elude veterans. Such a mind might attempt actions that seasoned commanders would dismiss as excessively perilous or unorthodox, innovating precisely because it has not yet internalized all the reasons why new concepts fail. Belisarius meticulously analyzed the Persian military doctrine and pinpointed its vulnerabilities. He observed their excessive reliance on heavy cavalry charges, which, while potent, were ultimately predictable. He noted their presumption that numerical superiority guaranteed victory, a logical but exploitable fallacy. He recognized the cultural imperative of single combat, which, while honorable, could be manipulated into compelling commanders to accept undue risks. He perceived an entire military philosophy predicated on past successes, making it optimized for battles already won, rather than for the conflicts yet to come. With systematic, ruthless efficiency, and without mercy or hesitation, he exploited each of these weaknesses. The excavated trenches nullified the cavalry charges. Ambush tactics punished their assumption of dominance. Andreas's victories in single combat turned Persian traditions against them. The peace overture fostered overconfidence. Every component of Belisarius's strategy transformed a specific Persian strength into a susceptibility. Such a feat demands audaciousness, ingenuity, and a mind prepared to forge a new path rather than adhere to established protocols. It requires someone unfamiliar with the myriad reasons why new concepts don't work, or someone who, having learned them, chooses to proceed nonetheless. Persians, on the other hand, strictly adhered to the traditional script: attack the flanks, deploy the Immortals when necessary, overwhelm the adversary with superior numbers, and leverage existing advantages and strengths. It was a well-honed strategy, one that had consistently succeeded for decades against previous Byzantine generals, other adversaries, and in countless skirmishes across the eastern frontier. There was no conceivable reason to believe it wouldn't succeed at Dara. Every historical precedent suggested it would. Belisarius, however, crafted a novel strategy manual. He used the terrain to his advantage, concealed reserves in unexpected locations, launched ambushes from seemingly impossible angles, and forced the enemy to fight on his terms rather than their own. He converted their assumptions into deadly traps. His plan was untested and fraught with peril, the kin of strategy that could lead to catastrophic failure if anything went awry. If the Heruli were detected, if the Huns attacked prematurely, or if the Bucellarii arrived too late. Yet, it succeeded. Each element fell perfectly into place, every gamble paid off, and every risk was precisely calculated. This is the achievement we commemorate. And here lies the ultimate lesson, the most significant one, the insight that contextualizes everything else and instills humility, even amidst celebrating genius. Perfection is fleeting. Belisarius achieved a brilliant, flawless, and impeccable victory at Dara. Everything aligned perfectly. Every decision proved correct, every risk paid off, every unit performed optimally, and every commander executed their role with precision. The battle unfolded like a meticulously choreographed performance, where each participant hit their mark at the exact moment. It was as close to an unblemished military triumph as warfare permits, and warfare, being the epitome of chaos, rarely allows for anything resembling flawlessness. Then, a year later, at Callinicum, it didn't. He suffered defeat. Not because he suddenly lost his intellect or forgot how to command, nor because the Persians abruptly devised some ingenious counter-tactic. He lost because his officers were insubordinate, because fortune did not favor him, and because warfare is fundamentally unpredictable. Occasionally, chaos prevails even against a brilliant mind. A single piece of faulty intelligence, an officer who disobeys orders, an unforeseen development. These are variables beyond control, prediction, or preparation, no matter how brilliant one may be. Even great generals experience defeat. This is the unvarnished reality of command that Hollywood rarely portrays. One can execute every action correctly and still fail. A perfectly conceived plan can collapse before one's eyes. A genius can appear foolish when circumstances turn adverse. Dara remained fortified for 43 years after the battle. The walls that Belisarius valiantly protected became an enduring emblem of Byzantine might, a definitive declaration of the empire's ability to safeguard its frontiers. A fortification embodying all that Justinian desired for the Byzantine Empire: robustness, resilience, invincibility, and worthiness of the Roman legacy. Yet, it eventually succumbed to Khosrow I in 573, changing hands repeatedly. Initially Byzantine, then Persian, then Byzantine once more, then Persian again, it fell, time and again. Even formidable strongholds are ultimately vulnerable. Stone and mortar cannot indefinitely withstand persistent siege warfare. Walls splinter under constant barrage. Defenders perish, surrender,
or simply lose the capacity to resist. The once unassailable transforms into the susceptible. The eternal proves fleeting. All solid structures eventually turn to dust. The Byzantine Empire persisted for another 900 years after Dara's initial fall. 9 centuries. This duration surpasses the entire history of the United States. It exceeds the lifespan most nations can expect. This represents an almost unfathomable expanse of time. The empire outlasted the Persians, then the caliphates that succeeded them, and then various kingdoms, dynasties, and entire civilizations that emerged and vanished while Constantinople endured. And then it too succumbed to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. The final emperor, Constantine XI, perished defending its ramparts. The city, which had stood for over a millennium, withstood countless sieges, and was Christendom's premier metropolis, fell. Even great empires collapse. Nothing is truly everlasting. Neither victories, nor fortresses, nor empires. Ultimately, everything that ascends will descend. This is not pessimism or defeatism, but simply the relentless action of time, eroding, degrading, and ultimately dismantling all human constructs. However, that particular day in June 530, the moment when a 25-year-old general confronted insurmountable odds and engineered a victory, remains timeless. Not because Belisarius never lost again, he did. Not because Dara never fell, it did. Not because the Byzantine Empire endured forever, it did not. But because in that singular instant, all factors converged. Preparation intersected with opportunity. Tactical brilliance met flawless execution. Youthful vigor combined with audacity. Genius materialized precisely when most indispensable. The outcome was one of the most impeccably orchestrated battles in military annals. A textbook illustration of achieving victory against expectations. A masterclass in transmuting disadvantages into strengths. A potent demonstration that intellect and meticulous planning can conquer brute force and numerical superiority when applied judiciously. Our historical sources indicate that Procopius, Belisarius's secretary and the pivotal historian for this engagement, was personally present. He was not relaying second-hand accounts decades later or synthesizing others' reports. He was there, either within the Byzantine ranks or atop Dara's walls, observing firsthand. He witnessed Andreas confronting the Persian champion. He saw the trenches redirect the Persian cavalry into lethal zones. He observed the Heruli emerging from behind the hill like wolves from a forest. He saw the Immortals, the fabled and indomitable elite of the Persian Empire, fragment and disperse like ordinary soldiers. He watched the impossible unfold into reality. And he meticulously documented it, recognizing its profound significance. It's imperative to be remembered, a subject for future generations to study and benefit from. Not merely for its tactical principles, though those remain invaluable and are still taught in military academies, but because he grasped the rarity of such moments. Moments when everything aligns seamlessly, when the strategy withstands enemy engagement, when genius achieves its deserved triumph, when David genuinely overcomes Goliath instead of merely dying bravely. Procopius furnishes one of the most comprehensive battle narratives from antiquity. He details the trench system, unit placements, attack sequences, psychological tactics, and individual duels. He recounts the stories of Andreas, the peace negotiations, and the Heruli ambush. He preserves critical details that would otherwise be lost to time. Due to his preservation efforts, we can still analyze this battle 14 centuries later, gleaning insights and drawing inspiration. That is why the Battle of Dara remains a topic of discussion 14 centuries hence. Not because it profoundly and permanently altered the world. It didn't really. The Byzantine-Persian conflicts persisted for another century thereafter, a back-and-forth struggle with neither side securing lasting dominion. Both empires progressively exhausted themselves, eventually allowing Arab forces to sweep in and conquer both.
Dara was but one battle within a century of conflicts, significant, indeed brilliant, but not globally transformative in a grand strategic context. The war continued, the frontier remained disputed. The enduring rivalry between Rome and Persia ground on until both were swept away by unforeseen powers. Yet, when the underdog rejects the notion that odds dictate outcomes, when an individual views the impossible as a challenge rather than a verdict, when youth and innovation prevail over age and experience, when the smaller army emerges victorious. This triumph wasn't born from chance, but from a superior grasp of critical elements: leadership prowess, meticulous planning, insightful intelligence, and flawless execution. Standing before Dara with 25,000 troops, Belisarius surveyed a Persian army of 50,000 and harbored a firm conviction: I can defeat them. Not a hopeful wish, or a hesitant attempt, or a desperate prayer for luck or survival, but an unwavering, I can defeat them. He possessed the blueprint. He had prepared rigorously, trained his soldiers thoroughly, reconnoitered the terrain, fortified his positions, and strategically placed his ambushes. Having laid the groundwork, he was ready to act. His aim was to demonstrate that meticulous preparation and intelligent strategy trump sheer numbers and established reputations. And he succeeded. His execution was masterful. The 50,000 adversaries learned a profound lesson. Numerical advantage does not guarantee victory. This is a testament, a stark reminder, a truth immutable over 1,400 years. This is why its significance endures. Should you find this narrative compelling, if it illuminated the potential unleashed when readiness meets opportunity, if it underscored that the odds are not destiny when diligence is applied, then consider subscribing to History Explained immediately, for we are merely at the start. Our focus is unraveling the strategic, psychological, and dramatic underpinnings of history's most pivotal battles. We pinpoint those instances where brilliance altered fortunes, where the disadvantaged found a path to victory, where the seemingly impossible materialized through foresight and intellect, not sheer chance or divine intervention. Next week, we will explore another improbable victory, where strategic genius overcame overwhelming opposition. It's another example of someone disregarding unfavorable odds, and another illustration of how careful planning and ingenious tactics surpass brute force. You'll definitely want to witness it, believe me. If the story of Dara captivated you, our upcoming content will be equally enthralling. Kindly share your favorite moment from this battle in the comments below. Was it Andreas's audacious confrontation with the Persian champions, turning derision into legend with two astonishing victories? Perhaps the unexpected emergence of the Heruli ambush, striking the Persian rear at the precise moment of maximum impact? Or Belisarius's impeccable timing, deploying his reserve Busalari at the perfect juncture to avert disaster and clinch triumph? Or was it something else entirely? Perhaps the psychological warfare embedded in that peace proposal, the elegant simplicity of the trench designs, or simply the image of a 25-year-old commander rejecting the notion of impossibility, proving that acumen and preparation can conquer all obstacles. Your thoughts in the comments are invaluable. I read every one, and am eager to understand what resonated with you, what prompted reflection, what insights you gained about strategy, leadership, or human capability you hadn't considered previously. If you know someone who needs to hear this account of how preparation and tactics can overcome raw power, how underdogs prevail through effort rather than luck, how genius manifests in flawless execution, how the impossible can be achieved with superior planning, then share this video with them. Present them with this snapshot of perfection from 14 centuries past. Show them what's attainable when one refuses to believe that the odds dictate the outcome. This is History Explained, where we demonstrate that sometimes the impossible merely demands more thorough planning, where we illustrate that the odds don't seal your fate if you're committed to the task, where we recall that perfection is transient, yet its lessons resonate eternally, where we celebrate those moments when everything aligned, gifting genius the victory it deserved. I look forward to seeing you in the next installment.